Well, we did touch on this some evenings ago when I referred to the Surangama Sutra and the Buddha's dialogue with Ananda. Do you remember? And the Buddha tried to demonstrate to Ananda that consciousness was not to be thought of as located within the body, outside the body, or somewhere in between, or on the surface of the body, or lurking within the eye, and so on. I mean, consciousness, by definition, as it were, is not a spatial thing. So how can you really speak of it as though it had a spatial relation with the body? You should be able to really, in a way, see the answer to this yourselves, because A, you have a body, which seems to occupy space, and 2, you have a consciousness. We'll just look and see how the two are related. The materials are there, to hang. Take a look and see what is my mind, my consciousness. Well, is it in my body? Or if it isn't in, is it outside my body? Or both, or neither, or just sort of in between, or on the surface. Where is it? Well, you ought to be able to see because you've got both. So this is what you should be doing, really, instead of asking me. I mean, you've got no better equipment than I have, and I'm in no better position to answer the question than you are. So what is the relation between consciousness and body? All one has to do is just stop and look and see. And make it a sort of simple factual observation. Actually, it sort of turns out to be a sort of koan, but that's another matter. You have to ask yourself also, question your assumptions. Because first of all, you're positing a body, then you're positing consciousness, and then you're trying to work out how the two are related, and whether the one is inside the other or not. So if you get into difficulties, well, you can ask yourself, well, do I actually see a body and a consciousness? What is my experience? In other words, question your assumptions. Are there really two things that you then have to proceed to relate? If there aren't, well, what do you have instead of a body and a consciousness? Again, one just needs to look at, to examine, to analyze one's own experience. And a little homework. One can certainly speak of the consciousness as separate from the body, because certainly one does have an experience sometimes, well, usually, of consciousness as being bound up with the body. But on the other hand, one does sometimes have the experience of consciousness, as it were, apart from the body. Again, one can, question the questioning of the assumptions, even if one wants to go as far as that, and say, well, yes, don't we experience a body and a consciousness? I mean, aren't the two distinct? Well, here's my body, and then sort of leaving that aside, well, there is something which I can identify as consciousness, which is quite, independent of the body, and which one can certainly imagine existing independently. But here perhaps you've been sort of, taking a certain expression literally, because one speaks, for instance, one perhaps can't help speaking, of consciousness, coming into the body. But consciousness can't come into the body. Consciousness can't come, from anywhere, because that is, a spatial terminology. And I mean, if consciousness is not in space, if consciousness is something non-spatial, consciousness cannot come and it cannot go. So if one speaks of consciousnesses coming from other worlds and other universes, clearly that cannot possibly be taken literally. Perhaps it's difficult to phrase in any other way, though perhaps one could do it if one tried. But certainly that particular mode of expression can't be taken literally. Again, perhaps it is safest to fall back on independence upon A, B arises. But one isn't to think literally. One isn't to think literally of disembodied consciousnesses arriving like meteors, from some other of the world. Well, if one has, for instance, a stone which doesn't appear to possess consciousness in the way that a human being has, but presumably it possesses, the potentiality of consciousness in the sense that independence upon the inanimate, including the stone, one might say, the animate, including the human consciousness arises. So in that sense, in a manner of speaking, the potentiality of consciousness is in the stone. But of course one mustn't take that, that little preposition in literally. Otherwise you sort of spatialize the non-spatial.
Would you take literally then this idea of the finite number of souls?
I wouldn't take literally any expression or statement in human language. It's impossible. I think you can take literally only a statement that is not meant to be taken literally. The only thing you can take literally is poetry and myth. Science, what you might say, has to be taken poetically. So you could be very extreme, and perhaps I just, since we are coming to the end of this series, I will be a bit extreme and say, if the scientific, is almost by definition the untruthful, and poetry almost by definition is the truthful. Which really sets the cat among the pigeons. That doesn't mean that science doesn't work. It works all right, but I'm really disputing that that science, in the sense of scientific theories, are literally true in the ultimate sense.
So does this idea of the finite number of souls in any way on its own level and its appropriate sphere of meaning have any relationship with what actually goes on?
Well, yes, if you can express it in a manner sufficiently poetical to actually communicate the truth that statement is capable of embodying. All statements are really pseudo-statements, and one is to take, as it were, the spirit of them, and not take them literally. I mean, for instance, if you look at the matter closely, you see that all the words that we use, all the expressions that we use, are derived from, for want of a better term, our sense experience. Our experience within space and time, through our senses. But we apply that empirically derived, language to non-empirical matters. For instance, we talk of one idea, depending on another. So what does depending mean? It means hanging from. So how can an idea hang from another idea? So clearly, you can't take the expression depending literally. So, what sense are you to take it? Well, you can only take it, as it were, poetically, and try to grasp, in a sense, intuitively, what it means when one speaks of an idea, one idea depending on another idea. Because when you speak of an idea depending on another idea, you don't mean the same thing that you mean as when you speak, say, of one link of a chain, depending on another link of the chain.